Before I start reading these stories, I first and foremost want to thank everybody for clicking on this video. If you enjoy my content, please be sure to subscribe and leave a comment saying hello. Or maybe even leave a comment explaining a scary situation that happened to you, because for all you know, it could be read on this very channel. So without further ado, let's get into story number 1. I had just gotten out of a shitty relationship with a guy I've been living with for almost 3 years. He was a pretty boy who looked like Johnny Depp, but he liked to steal all my money, and while I was at work, he liked to also throw crazy parties. I got tired of his stealing and coming home to emo kids asleep all over my house, so I did what was best for me and I left him. I didn't want anything but my stuff, and I let him keep the house and the cars I bought him. I just wanted my sanity back. I moved back in with my granny, and I'm her favorite grandchild, so she spoiled me as she usually does. I had recently reconnected with my best friend I had known since kindergarten. His name was Chris. I was hanging out with Chris on my back porch one morning when the subject of boys gets brought up. Chris is, without a doubt, absolutely flamboyantly gay, and we often talked about boys together. He asked if I was seeing anybody, and I told him I wasn't. It had only been a few months since I left the money leech, and I didn't think I was ready to trust anyone. Chris said he knew the perfect man for me. I said I don't think there's such a thing, and he goes on to beg me to meet this guy he knows. I reluctantly sigh and tell my granny that I'm going on an adventure with Chris. We talked as we drove, and he tells me that this guy has been in love with me since we were kids. He told me it was his little boy, Quinn, that used to follow me around. I told him that I thought Quinn was a lot younger than us, and he told me that Quinn is just short like me. He called Quinn and told me to talk to him. I do, and he seems really sweet, but a little airheaded. We show up at his house, and he's really pretty. He was also very sweet, has a good job, and his own car, and owns his own company. We start hanging out a lot, and eventually started dating. He buys me presents like nice jewelry and Prada sunglasses. He told me his girl only deserved the best, and I told him I couldn't just accept all these gifts, but if he would just dump them in my car or purse when I wasn't looking, I could just learn to take them. He wanted to always call me and talk for hours, and also wanted me to call him when I got home from his house. I thought he was sweet and just wanted to be sure I got home safely. The reality set in rather quickly. He introduced me to his entire family within a couple of days of us dating. I usually don't introduce guys to my family until we're serious, but it's whatever. Upon meeting his mother, I learned that it's her house and he lives there with her. I also learned that he currently has no job other than doing odd chores for his dad. I was absolutely speechless, and he also lied about being my age. I was like 24 and he had just turned 18 like that day or so before we started dating. I was so upset and I didn't know how to feel. He begs me not to leave him and to take him to my play rehearsal the next day. He shows up in my driveway just as I was leaving for the theater. Chris drove him there and tells me we need to sort our shit out. He said if Quinn was gay, he'd be all over him, and he also tells me not to leave him over just a few small lies. The whole drive is awkward. I don't want to talk to this guy. I want him gone. He pulls out a diamond ring and tries to propose to me. I tell him no, but he slides the rock on my finger anyways. He says I need to think about it. I got to the theater and shit just goes downhill from there. He embarrassed me in front of my friends with his ignorance and childishness, and threw a bitch fit because my other best friend, Mikey, gave me a piggyback ride. Quinn then proceeds to storm out of the theater, and then his mother starts calling to check up on him. I decided I was done. After rehearsal, I got a friend to go with me to drive him home. I tried to give his ring back, but he wouldn't take it, and I leave to go to a bar with my fellow actors. I told him that was why I had to take him home so early. Driving back, I see flashing lights in my rearview mirror and hear yelling. Chris and Quinn are following me. I pull up to the bar and Chris throws Quinn and myself at each other and yells that we needed to talk. I break up with Quinn, so he starts throwing a bitch fit. I walk into the bar with my friend. I spend the night at Mikey's for a few days, and when I returned home, I have a ton of harassing phone calls. He called me and my grandparents every few hours. He even had Chris help. Everywhere I went, he was there. He stalked me at home, made me run from a theater during a movie, and followed my car. And Chris helped him do all of this. He pulled a gun on my family while we were outside during Easter, and I was helping the little kids hunt eggs. He cruised by several times and then pulled his gun. He also creeped by with his gun pointed at us. I filed a restraining order that day. I moved in with Mikey so he would leave my grandparents alone. I went nowhere without at least 2 guys with me at all times. I thought any minute he would come and kill me. I felt hunted like a deer in the woods, but I was lucky. He shot up the car of his next girlfriend while her 2-year-old daughter was inside. God damn, I was lucky. This past Easter, my dad, a pilot for a cargo shipping company, was in town and offered to take me across the inlet for a nice dinner. As his co-pilots were away from their families, they were also invited to join and gladly did. While I waited for them to validate their tickets in the ferry terminal, I spotted an unlikely duo standing by the door. 2 guys, late 20s at most. One large and oafish, the other shorter and movie star gorgeous. I looked just in time to see the oaf nod in my direction, and the one who looked like a movie star makes a face that can only be described as meh. I'd fuck her after a few beers. They stood close to us in the terminal. Keep in mind, this ferry carries hundreds of people at a time, and I told my dad about the nod. He laughed and continued talking to his co-pilots next to us. Every time I looked over, movie star was already looking at me. I shook my head. We sat on opposite ends of the ferry. Oaf and movie star were debarking before us, and I was glad they were gone. We walked up the street from the terminal to the restaurant, and when I turned back to take in a view of the city across the water, I was surprised to find the duo had somehow ended up behind us and were walking slowly up the street. I didn't think too much on it. It was a busy area and lots of pubs were around, so they could have just been going to any one of them. I did think about it more though when they walked by the restaurant, peering intently into the front window where we were standing waiting for a table. They smiled, exchanged words with one another, and kept moving. I let out a sigh of relief until they walked back from the opposite direction. They stopped and they leaned on a bike rack in front of the restaurant for a few minutes, then left. Movie star stared at me over his shoulder the entire time. Over dinner, I informed my dad and his co-pilots of the events that transpired without them even realizing. They laughed about it and eventually had me laughing about it too. We'd never seen the pair of guys again. 3 hours later, as we waited for the return ferry, I was talking to our company, recounting a story from earlier at dinner when I had spotted Oaf and Movie Star over my dad's shoulder. Movie Star was looking my way, and scratched that, staring. I quickly informed the guys, and they were shocked, and kept looking back at the pair. There was a miniature showdown in the ferry terminal, as each party stared each other down from opposite ends. I ended up getting a 3-man escort home that night. So, Movie Star and Shrek-looking ogre, let's not meet again. I've read a lot of terrifying stories on here and just thought I'd contribute something that had happened when I was a child. It's not as bad as some, but even now, over 20 years later, it still sticks with me. When I was around 10, my parents belonged to a local bowling team, and sometimes they'd take my siblings and I along to the bowling alley to go watch. This particular night happened to be the night before Easter. My younger brother and I decided to grab a bowling ball and sit in a carpeted walkway and just roll it back and forth because we were bored. While we were doing that, a man approached and started talking to us. He seemed nice at first, just asking simple questions like how are you doing and are you excited for the Easter Bunny and getting lots of candy, etc. I didn't think anything of it, so I just answered his questions politely. Then, out of the blue, the guy whispered to me, "I know where you live. I'm like the Easter Bunny, but instead of candy, I'm going to come in your house and kill you and your family." He rambled on, basically repeating that over and over, and stuff about it being our last night to live. I just remember looking at the man speechless and then getting up and grabbing my brother to go find my parents. I didn't tell them what he said, and in hindsight, I definitely should have. I was terrified all of Easter because I was scared this man was going to actually come to our house. So, creepy man in the bowling alley, let's never meet again. This event took place quite a few years ago, so unfortunately, I don't remember everything that happened, but I remember nearly all of it. Anyways, this happened when I was around 4 or 5 years old, and on Easter Sunday, my family always gathers at my grandmother's house to celebrate holidays, birthdays, etc. So as we do every holiday, my mother and I started our hour-long trip over to her house. My mother prefers to live away from all the city commotion, which explains the long drive. We were probably around 20 minutes from our destination when my mom noticed that we were a little low on gas. So we pull into this old, almost rustic looking gas station with just a handful of customers inside. It was red and white with a few festive decorations outside and lots of Easter stickers on the 2 large glass windows that were on either side of the door. My mom, having taught me not to talk to strangers nor open the car doors for anyone but her, trusted me enough to leave me in the car alone while she went inside briefly to pay for our gas. She told me that she would be right back before going into the gas station. It felt nice that day, so the windows in the car were down so we could feel the breeze while driving instead of the AC. While I was waiting on my mom, I remember adjusting the colorful paper clippings in my Easter basket next to me, then looking out of the backseat window. When I looked over, I saw a tall, older man, maybe around 30 or 40 years old, approaching my window. He crouched down slightly and looked at me. "Hi there, what's your name?" I remember him saying. At this moment, I remembered that I wasn't supposed to talk to strangers, so I told the man that my mom says I shouldn't talk to strangers. He then replies with, "Well, can we be friends then? My name's Charlie, and now that you know, I guess I'm not a stranger, huh?" At the time, I had thought he was right. In my mind, I thought, since a stranger is someone you don't know, this man wasn't a stranger anymore because I knew his name. The man and I had a short conversation that I don't quite remember. All I remember is him telling me that I had a nice Easter basket. At this point, I started to get a sick feeling in my stomach, but being a child, of course I didn't know why. My mom then walked out of the gas station and noticed the man immediately and began approaching the car quickly, asking the man what he thought he was doing. The man seems to panic and he pulls my car door handle violently. He quickly realized that it was locked, thankfully, and proceeded to reach into my window and grab me by one of my wrists as an attempt to pull me out. This obviously scared me a lot, causing me to panic and pull against him on instinct. This caused him to let go and take off running. My mom quickly ran to the car and I unlocked the doors. She grabbed me and pulled me into an almost painful bear hug, then inspected me closely, repeatedly asking if I was okay. I ended up with a slight bruise / redness on my arm where he grabbed me, but other than that, I was just quite shaken up. The reality of what had just happened set in at this moment, and I remember just crying and holding on to my mom right after I said I was okay. I don't remember anything after this point, but I recently asked my mom about it, and she said that she had called the police immediately after. To this day, my mom still says that this was the most frightening moment of her life, and claims that if she had gotten there any later and came back to an empty car, she wouldn't have been able to live with herself.